majority of data in the world actually still sits in these repositories. And so that's really the vision of how do we liberate this stuff or mobilize this stuff so that you are free to build it wherever you want. Now, freedom comes in a cost though, right? You have to make sure that you're doing the proper things to it, right? That you're securing it, that you're managing it. So when stuff breaks or goes sideways or whatever else.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumitech, sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Synergy Global, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, Birthright Excel, Serona Partners, and in media partnership with CTech. Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Today we're talking about data mobility with Gary Hagmueller, the CEO of Arcion. Gary is the CEO of Arcion, the world's first true data mobility platform. Gary is a proven CEO who has created over $7.5 billion in enterprise value through 2 IPOs and 4 M&A exits over his 20-plus years in the tech industry. Gary holds an MBA from the Marshall School of Business at the University of Southern California, where he was named Sheth Fellow, as well as a bachelor's in business administration from Arizona State University. As the father to twin teenage boys, he is clearly experienced in project management and negotiating skills. You know, we're talking about software engineering, data pipelines, and entrepreneurship at the same time. This is my world. This is what I wake up in the morning for. So thank you very, very much for being here. Your entrepreneurial career, your executive career spans across a variety of organizations. You've done fascinating things, but really in this 20 minutes, I want to focus with you on picking your brain about this data mobility question of the world. Data, Mark Andreessen said, I think a decade ago, software is eating the world, but really it's all about data. And this is how we make decisions from government to social to the way we build companies. And so, Gary, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure.
Well, data, in your perspective, choosing to go on another entrepreneurial endeavor with Arcion, why data mobility? What is this thing that you have with data?
Yeah. Well, no, look, it's a great question. And I love your, software will eat the world analogy earlier. The truth is that software all runs on data, right? And so if you don't get the data to the software, the world doesn't run. So the backstory here is my coming to Arcion and trying to figure out how to mobilize data and get access to stuff is really rooted in my background, right? Which over about 10 years or so of doing machine learning and AI that was, building applications that were sold to financial services firms and all these large companies. What I became aware of very acutely was the fact that all of these folks had lots of really interesting and valuable information locked up in their transactional databases. Didn't really have a good way to get there. And it struck me as like super odd because I'm like, these transactions are the lifeblood of the businesses that they were running. And yet they were relegated to seeing them on like, let's say a weekly or a monthly or some other, batch periodic sort of update. And for me, the thought was like, look, all the value or much of the value in that data is gone a week after the transaction is over, right? Because think about all the things you can do very close to the point at which somebody interacts with your business. So that's really the genesis of why I decided that Arcion was the right move here, because frankly, what the world needs right now is the ability to tap into data in real time without affecting those systems and making sure that the people who can build applications or machine learning or whatever it is that they're going to reap value out of that data, have access to it in real time. And that's basically what we do. And it's been a great journey for the last couple of months as we start spreading the message.
Phenomenal. And so if we're looking now at the question of why hasn't it happened yet, right? Because this is an important question we have to consider. And I'm thinking, obviously, data is running everything. Everything is about data. And obviously, I want to have visibility, transparency, and integration with all of the different data points, especially, those more obscure ones, unstructured ones, etc. Why are we in 2022 and it's still a problem that's not solved?
Yeah, so I think it breaks into 2 basic categories, right? So the category 1 is really a function of the systems within which that data lives. And category number 2 is really a function of the nature of the transactional data and all that. So let's start with the first category, right? So while you and I, Michael, are kind of entrepreneurial and we think of the world as like all the things that it should be, as soon as you build one of these companies and let's say you build like an Oracle or whatever else, you kind of have an incentive to keep the data in there as much as possible, right? Because that enhances your value, right? So thing number one is there's a bit of a business driver or a structural sort of driver that has successful companies that build repositories want to keep the data in them. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is a little bit more prosaic, right? And that is the fact that, when you have a transactional database, you want to make sure of a bunch of things. Number one, you can't afford to have that thing slow down, right? So you can't hammer the thing on a regular basis, right? The second thing is you want to make sure that it's highly secure, right? You can't have people dinking around in a production database because it's going to affect any number of things downstream, right? So there's some structural reasons why you want to create separation between the transactions themselves and the downstream things that will end up consuming it. So when you put those two things together, it really forms this thing that has helped perpetuate the silos that we all talk about and write papers about and all of that sort of thing, right? But in reality, unless you have something like what Archeon is, which kind of sits just outside the production systems and taps into the logs and then reassembles things into kind of a database without necessarily the repository, you're not going to be able to get at those things in a way that works both for the structural elements of the company's motives as well as the security and performance characteristics that IT groups require, right?
So walk me through the process. If I'm right now leading an organization and I have a bunch of transactional data, it can be any organization, any business, and you're coming and you're trying to shine light for me as to what I may have blind spots and what I may
Yeah.
be missing from not being able to leverage on this data that Archeon is able to put
Yeah.
together. What is sort of that pitch looks like?
Well, so I mean, the pitch basically looks like what my customers used to go through, right? So when we would build these applications, all the business users or the data scientists or the data engineers would want to see this stuff come out in real time, right? Because it would make their models more performant and accurate and everything else like that. But what would wind up happening is their IT groups would say like, hey, that's great, but you're going to impact my production system. You can have it maybe weekly in some kind of a batch or monthly, which was a really common sort of thing. So the pitch for us now is kind of a two-step pitch. Number one, we spend a lot of time partnering with the systems that consume our data. So think all these cloud repositories, Snowflake, Databricks, the list is actually quite long. We've got a number of partnerships, right? And so we work with them because they have an incentive to help these customers of ours or our joint customers get access to the data because they're the platforms that they will interact with on it. So they go to the data scientists or the data engineers, or sometimes even the business users and say, hey, we have this way that we can go off and help you get access to these transactional things so you can build these really cool, applications or whatever on them. So then those folks get interested in it. And there's a process that goes on within the larger organizations, our customer organizations, where they go to the people who actually own the data repositories, and then it becomes an education step for us where we show them how we're not going to impact their systems, and our security profile is actually far superior than anything that they might be able to do. And really what happens at first is there's kind of an adversarial, hey, don't touch my systems sort of
Right.
stance that flips very rapidly to like, oh, hey, I don't like writing scripts and batch updates and that
Yeah.
sort of thing anyway. So this seems like it's really going to solve a lot of those problems without impacting my world. And they become advocates pretty quickly. So that's kind of this motion that we see in most of our sales cycles. And the interesting thing is the IT groups actually wind up becoming our biggest champions shortly after the first implementation goes live, because now a lot of the people and nobody likes to write scripts, by the way. So a lot of the people who were in the IT groups writing these queried things that would go against the database and break all the time would turn around and say like, I don't have to do that anymore. This is great. I can go off and do the things that I used to like to do before somebody made me go write scripts and other stuff like that. So they wind up being our biggest champions for other people who have these sorts of needs.
Incredible. Okay, and if we're looking today at the bigger world and where we're moving with data beyond Archeon, how is this going to impact the way that we are able to make sense of transactions, of logs, of data that
Yeah.
is happening that right now we don't have access to?
Well, I think that's really the end goal here. And so, from my perspective and from our company's perspective, our view is Data, it really goes back to the concept of mobility, right? You should be free to build whatever application or machine learning use or AI, whatever it is, in whatever, platform makes the most sense for the application you're trying to build, right? And so you can see that happening today. There's certain cloud vendors who are good at machine learning. There's others that are good at BI. There's others that are good at real time. But our view is it doesn't matter, right? Whatever your use case is, go pick the right choice for you, right? The data should just come to you, right? And it shouldn't matter where it's from. Like, so today there's a lot of decent solutions. If you want to get things out of, let's say, Salesforce or, ServiceNow or other things,
Mhm.
but those things are already built to kind of give you the feeds, right? They're kind of event driven sorts of things. But the majority of data in the world actually still sits in these repositories. And so that's really the vision of how do we liberate this stuff or mobilize this stuff so that you are free to build it wherever you want. Now, freedom comes in a place though, right? You have to make sure that you're doing the proper things to it, right? That you're securing it, that you're managing it. So when stuff breaks or goes sideways or whatever else, right? You need a platform to basically manage that. That's what we build. And my view is, look, if we don't build a management layer over this sort of thing, you're basically just going to change the profile of the resources you have to hire in these IT groups into ones that build the pipes, into this army of people that has to now go and debug stuff and make sure stuff is running. And that feels like you should be able to very easily build a layer that will control that and make it pretty seamless. That's what we're doing. And when you do that, you then get to a world where you can dream the big thoughts and you can come up with interesting things. You can experiment better, right? I mean, that's like half the battle that we were seeing with the data science teams of our customers. Is they wanted to go off and be creative, and they would be stuck figuring out how the heck do I get like the data to get creative in, right? So that's kind of the
Yeah.
big vision of what we want to do here. And I think that creativity then drives lots of business value and lots of innovation.
I love it. I spent some quality time as a data engineer and a data scientist in various organizations, and I can
Yep.
remember, that thrill of being able to finally have my data set and being able to play
Yeah,
around with it, only to 2 days later saying, "Oh no, I'm now I understand there's this whole other world that I don't have access to yet. Let's go on this
exactly.
2 month project to get access to it, just so that I can be
Exactly.
creative."
You have
And it's a
You've like come join my sales team. That is exactly the pitch, right? And that's actually what the software does too. We have this thing that we call inference, where what
right,
happens is when you update a thing in a transactional database, sometimes it goes to multiple different tables and there's all these interesting business rules. But what's really lacking in a lot of the pipeline creation mode today is the understanding that like, hey, there's this rule, and if you don't get all this other data, your analysis is never going to be complete, or it's never going to be
right.
accurate or performant, right? And so that's really one of the big pitches that we have to the data teams, which is why go through this tortured process of iteration and then begging people to like give you access to more things when you should just be able to say, I want this set of things up front.
100%. So transitioning more towards, the leadership side of the startup. This
Yeah,
is not your first role as an executive within a company.
yeah,
You've held so many interesting roles, from director to chief operating officer to chief financial officer, and working and president and CEO of Clara Analytics, and so still in the data space, and then CEO of dgraph Labs for several months. And I'm really curious what you're taking with you from these roles as you're now entering a new,
yep,
SF based startup
yeah,
that is in one of the hottest spaces, in the world today.
yeah.
What are you taking with you as this entrepreneur now?
Well, so I think so. The main things that I take. So number one, I think for me, like personally, this entrepreneurial journey, there's like a mental, acuity sort of stuff. I'm kind of an adrenaline junkie, right? And like if there aren't like 15 things going on at the same period of time, I'm gonna be bored, and then my wife gets mad at me, right? And so, those are all things that drive me forward. But in terms of like how to do this sort of stuff. Look, a couple of things, right? I think the most important thing you can do as somebody who's entrepreneurial or building a business or whatever else is really focus in on the people around you, right? These things don't get built alone, right? And they get built with a team that basically is like minded. and is one that drives each other. And that doesn't, by the way, that doesn't mean that like everybody just is, thinking the same way. In fact, I actually really rather enjoy having people around who will push, not in a rude way or anything else like that, but will basically push and say, are we really doing the right thing? Are we really spending the right focus on the right stuff? Right. So number one, the thing that I take with me from the experience in the past is making absolutely sure that you've got a team of great people around you. And I'm really blessed here at Arcion, and that a number of people who I thought the world of prior to coming here decided that, hey, this would be an interesting place for them to come and spend some more time. So for me personally, that's something that, that really drives me and makes me feel great on that front. And then the second piece is, the interesting thing about being an entrepreneur in a tech company is tech companies, if you do it right, they can do everything, right? You can build software that does just about anything. The real challenge though is not doing everything, right? Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. It's really netting down to what is most important, be it customers, be it developing certain aspects of the technology to make it strategically valuable, what have you, right? It's making sure that you do just enough to create value, but not so much that you create diffusion. And if you combine those two sorts of things, and it usually takes a mature profile of people who will come and join you, then you wind up in this wonderful world where magic kind of happens and markets kind of move forward and you can transform stuff.
Starting a new company in December, you've also spent several months as an AR with Redpoint Ventures. Any big surprises that you're like, okay, now I'm going on this journey. I've been on this journey before. I've sat next to people who've been at this seat that you're in right now for many years. What surprised you now?
So the company, first off, I joined it. It was started in December, but that's okay. The main gist of surprise for me is, well, a couple things, right? So I think the earliest form of surprise on this journey here was how receptive companies, like I mentioned earlier, like Databricks, who invested in our last round, and others. The big surprise was how receptive those companies would be to partnering with us. Now, having spent a bunch of years in startup sorts of companies, the amount of partner interest in this firm at our stage is more than I've ever seen before, right? Usually what happens in these partner discussions is you spend a year or two talking about stuff, right, without any real demonstrable movement forward, right? Whereas in here, we've got partners pushing us. So I've got emails and, Slack texts from people saying like, hey, when is our connection going to get done? When is this thing going to get done? When are you going to jump on these deals, right? Which is awesome. It tells us that there's a lot of interesting things out there. It does fit into the same prioritization bucket then too, though, right? You have to go and pick the partners who you're going to be successful with now, because you want them to be really successful and talk about you. Right. And then you can move on to the others where maybe there's something that's a little bit more challenging, or maybe the market fit isn't perfect or whatever else. So that's been like one of the big challenges or surprises, I would say. But it's a super positive sort of thing. And, I'm grateful for the great partnerships we have with these people.
I love it. I love it. And if you're looking now at some things that I can take with me as I'm going to be going on my own journey, and myself, my friends, things specifically also in our space, in engineering, developer tools, and for the companies, and you have so many different sides of this company. You have to be both friendly implementation for the developers. You have to also speak to the business people. You have to be very mindful of the sensitivity of what you're doing. What are some non-trivial things that I should be taking with me from your experience as I go on my own journey as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So look, I think the main takeaways, I think, especially as you move into this CEO sort of role, is you can't please everybody, right? And so a lot of the things that I said earlier in terms of making priorities, sometimes there's going to be hard decisions and hard conversations that need to be had, right? So first off, it's really identifying those things. Okay, so we can't do this, right? And then the secondary thing is never closing a door, right? Because just because you can't do it today doesn't mean that it might not be the right thing to do in 6 months or 9 months. The trick and the essence of how to thread this needle is to figure out how to build a relationship with the other people who you're going to say no or not now to, in such a way that they're not like, okay, well, these guys are jerks and they're not going to do it. You have to get to a state where they understand. And this, by the way, this is in my theory in management as well, right? You have to get to a place where the people you're working with, be they managers, partners, customers, whatever, understand the reasons why you're making the decisions so they can buy into them, right? They may not like it, right?
Right.
People don't like being told no, but they have to understand, okay, got it. If I, like if I'm not going to do this thing, it's going to like the whole company is going to be a problem or whatever else, right? And so you need to make sure that you're diplomatically telling people the things that need to be told, hard or otherwise, and making sure they understand. And once you have that level of transparency, your trust level goes up. They respect you a lot more, and they're much more likely to call you and check in and say, "Hey, is that time right now?" Right? And so that's the thing that over time you have to learn. And once you do, it makes life actually a lot easier.
Incredible. Gary, I really want to thank you. Such an interesting perspective, interesting career, and I love the time and place that you're in, and the way that you're running this show, and the insights that you have with it. And I'm sold on the problem space. I'm looking forward to trying out the product myself, but this is a pain. This is
Yeah.
a real pain, and I think what I love about this type of company is that it's a pain that it's not trivial to understand the impact that this is going to have on the ripple effect. But at the end, software is eating the world. Software runs on data. This is enabling the data to actually be understood. And so it's all a pyramid, and this is a foundation. And so best of luck with Arcion. I hope that you can solve this pain for all of us, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's a real pleasure. All right.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Yeah.